Now, jittery global markets and an oil price that has reached a 4-year high, all stoked by a US decision earlier this month to no longer honor the Iran nuclear deal. While one expert says South Africa and its developing economy will feel a significant negative impact due to the planned imposition of US sanctions. Head of Investment Analytics at GTC Investment Analytics, Clive Eggers, joins us now. Clive, good evening. So we are already feeling this immediate effect from that move by the US on Iran, and I suppose it will become more tangible. The pinch will be felt more in 9 days' time when we head off to the petrol pumps, because that's where the real pinch comes in, the oil price leading to a higher petrol price.
Good evening, Devan, and thanks for having me on the show this evening. Yes, I'd agree with that. Unfortunately, I think the real impact from the decision that Trump took earlier this month will only be felt by South Africans some months off. As you probably are familiar, inflation tends to take a while to work its way into a system. Yes, there obviously is a mechanism directly in terms of the petrol price, but then the knock-on impact into goods and services will come through into the economy and ultimately is expected to drive inflation higher for the average South African.
So we've seen the effect of what happens when the oil price goes up as a result of this uncertainty that's put forward by the US and its move on Iran. But given our relationship with this Middle Eastern country, how else is South Africa economically vulnerable because of this impending sanctions on Iran by the US?
Well, there are other businesses involved in Iran, South African-based businesses. So the classic case in point is MTN. I think most investors are aware of its exposure to the Iranian economy, and that's going to have a very direct impact. And then it depends on the actions taken by the United States to try and enforce the sanctions that it's talking about imposing on Iran. Potentially they could take punitive measures on South African businesses that are operating in Iran that refuse to curtail their involvement with Iran, as US is suggesting that it should. So the impacts are potentially far greater than just the increase in the oil price and the knock-on inflation.
Clive, this #1 world economy, the United States, proves to be influential beyond that. I mean, if we just look at the fact that the US economy is now showing signs of improving, that in turn has an effect on the US dollar. That rises. By extension, the rand weakens. It just goes to show you how a big US economy has an immediate effect on an economy like ours, and I suppose a lot of economies across the emerging markets.
Absolutely correct. South Africa is a small, open economy. We are labelled as an emerging market economy, even though we don't necessarily display all of the classic characteristics of one. And for better or for worse, we very much move in line with global trends that often have a far greater impact on certainly the investment space in South Africa than arguably some of the local developments that seem to dominate local investors' thinking and newspaper headlines.
And that's quite interesting, because if you look at the end of 2017, a domestic-related euphoria when President Cyril Ramaphosa took the leadership of the ANC, we saw that rand race to about 11.50. Now it's sitting and teasing the 13 rand mark. Of course, we look at the US dollar and hope that we'll get some stability there. What's your forecast on where this dollar is going? Because so much of that strength depends on where we will be with rand value on this side. Yeah,
obviously very, very difficult to call currencies, particularly in the short term. The consensus forecast from the economists and managers that we speak to seems to be that the dollar strength will continue. That's the back of primarily the Federal Reserve, to all intents and purposes, looking like they're going to stick to their guns by hiking interest rates more later in this year. And obviously that's going to lead to dollar strength. But of course, there could be other factors that come into play, Trump and other political developments notwithstanding, that might counter that view. But in general, the rand is, interestingly enough, trading at around close to fair value levels. It's not abundantly obvious that it's particularly weak or strong on a fair value basis at the moment. But the thinking is that over the course of this year, the dollar is likely to strengthen from this point, and therefore the rand more than likely will weaken further from these levels.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed, Clive. That was Head of Investment Analytics at GTC Investment Analytics, Clive Eggers.